Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're tackling a topic today that, well, it feels profoundly personal for so many, something you might experience yourself or, see someone you care about navigating.
That's right. We're taking a deep dive into two really powerful human experiences, loneliness and grief. And while they're incredibly common, understanding them deeply, their impact, and maybe most importantly, how people find that way through them, well, that offers some vital insights.
Absolutely. Our mission in this deep dive is to really unpack what these feelings are, why they matter so much to our health, our well-being, and also explore where they come from, and then pull out the most important knowledge we have about finding connection and support. It's all about getting you better informed on these fundamental parts of being human.
Makes sense.
So let's dive in. Let's start by maybe trying to define these feelings, because they do get confused sometimes. Take loneliness. It's not simply about being physically alone. You could be sitting by yourself reading a book and feel perfectly content.
Right. That's solitude.
Exactly. Solitude, so just the state of being alone, which, yeah, a lot of people cherish. Loneliness is different. It's that unpleasant emotional response, that deep sense of disconnection that comes from feeling isolated, from like a perceived lack of meaningful social contact.
Yeah. It's often described as a kind of social pain.
Social pain, yes. Maybe evolutionarily designed, perhaps, to signal that you need to seek connection. A bit like physical pain signals, tissue damage.
That's a good way to put it.
And crucially, you can feel this social pain, this loneliness, even when you're surrounded by people, in a classroom, at a party, even within your own family.
That distinction between chosen solitude and the actual pain of loneliness is really key. And grief, while it can certainly lead to loneliness, it's fundamentally a different kind of feeling.
Okay.
Grief is that deep sorrow, the mourning, that follows a significant loss. And yeah, most commonly we think of it when someone close dies. It's a complex, multifaceted response to having your world just fundamentally changed by absence.
Right.
And there's just no one right way to grieve. The range of emotions and experiences is huge, and they're all considered normal. You might feel numb or shocked at first, like struggling to even register what happened.
Yeah.
Fear about the future, guilt sometimes for even being alive when they're not even anger. Anger at the person for leaving, or just anger at the whole situation. These are all, part of that complex emotional landscape of grief.
And it's not just emotional, is it? I mean, the sheer weight of grief can show up physically, too.
Oh, absolutely.
People navigating grief often report physical symptoms that can be quite debilitating. Things like persistent fatigue, trouble sleeping,
Or sleeping too much.
right, or sleeping too much, changes in appetite, losing weight, gaining weight, difficulty concentrating, like a mental fog that makes even simple decisions feel overwhelming. And it's just vital to understand these aren't signs you're grieving incorrectly. They're common physiological cognitive responses to profound loss. Your body and mind are reacting.
Exactly. They're reacting to the stress and the reality of this absence. And while the really intense, acute pain of that immediate grief often starts to lessen over time for most people, that feeling of missing the person, the awareness, they're gone, that can definitely continue. Sometimes indefinitely.
Yeah.
It's completely normal for the grieving process to involve ups and downs. Good days, bad days where the pain feels fresh again. And yes, you might even find yourself laughing or having a genuinely good moment with friends or family.
And then feel guilty.
And then feel these surprising waves of guilt right after. It's just a messy, nonlinear process. Those moments of brightness aren't a betrayal of the loss. They're a natural part of navigating life within it.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So, okay, this brings us to the next big question. Why do these feelings, loneliness and grief, why do they matter so profoundly? This is where the research takes us from just the emotional experience to something with like significant tangible impact. When loneliness becomes chronic, persists for a long time. Studies show it's linked to some serious physical health risks.
This is where it gets really interesting and, frankly, quite alarming. Chronic social isolation and loneliness aren't just unpleasant feelings. They're increasingly understood as significant risk factors for various physical ailments.
Like what?
Well, we're talking about a higher likelihood of developing conditions like high blood pressure, heart disease, a weakened immune system, which makes you more susceptible to getting sick.
Wow, and the connections extend even further, right, into brain health.
That's right. Some research suggests a link between chronic loneliness and an increased risk for neurodegenerative diseases later in life, specifically mentioning Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's.
How does that work?
Well, the idea is that the constant stress response triggered by feeling isolated seems to have these widespread physiological consequences affecting the brain, too.
It's quite striking.
It really is. Some findings have even tried to quantify this risk, suggesting that the increased risk of death associated with chronic loneliness can be comparable to,
Get this.
or even greater than, well-established risk factors like smoking a pack of cigarettes a day or leading a completely sedentary lifestyle.
That's incredible, thinking about loneliness in the same breath as smoking.
Right. It really underscores its seriousness as a public health issue, not just an individual emotional state.
And of course, the impact on mental health is profound, too.
Oh, absolutely. Loneliness and grief are powerfully linked to higher rates of depression and anxiety. For younger people, severe loneliness has been associated with increased risk of self-harm and even suicidal thoughts.
Mm.
And in older adults, particularly those facing multiple transitions like widowhood and retirement, that combination of loneliness and depression can be especially debilitating. It's a tragic reality that for some severely lonely older individuals, while they might not overtly discuss suicide, their actions, like stopping eating or messing with necessary medication doses,
Oh, no.
can sometimes be these passive expressions of just wanting the suffering to end.
That's heartbreaking. And zooming out even further, there's this growing discussion about the potential societal impact of widespread loneliness, right?
Yes, if a significant portion of a population feels disconnected and isolated, what does that do to the social fabric? Some theories suggest it could potentially influence political attitudes, maybe fostering greater suspicion of others, eroding trust, undermining the ability of communities to, work together on shared challenges.
So the individual pain can add up.
Exactly. It can, in aggregate, have broader societal consequences.
Okay, so if these feelings have such a significant impact, both personally and maybe even societally, where do they come from? Exploring the causes seems like it reveals a pretty complex web of factors.
It is complex. Naturally, significant loss, especially the death of a loved one, that's a primary trigger for grief. And as we said, this profound absence can also lead to intense loneliness, even if you have supportive people around you.
But it's not just about loss through death, is it?
Definitely not. Big life changes, even ones that seem positive on the surface, can contribute. Moving to a new city for a job, the inevitable disruption to your existing social circles that follows any major transition.
Like getting married or having a kid.
Exactly. While wonderful, these events can consume time and energy, potentially disrupting previous social connections and leading to feelings of isolation if you don't actively manage them. Any big shift that alters your social landscape can be a factor.
And there might be cultural dynamics at play, too. Maybe something about increased individualism in some societies.
Some findings do point towards that, yeah. Perhaps related to increasing trends of individualism where traditional community ties might be, weaker. And then there's this insidious aspect that loneliness can become self-perpetuating.
How so?
Feeling isolated can unfortunately lead to negative thought patterns. Like you start believing people wouldn't want to spend time with you, or you become more socially anxious.
Which makes it harder to reach out.
Exactly. It makes it harder to initiate contact or feel comfortable in social situations. And this creates a difficult cycle where the feeling of loneliness makes it harder to connect, which then just reinforces the loneliness. It's kind of tricky.
That sounds tough. And you mentioned a practical barrier, too, especially for older adults.
Yes, on a very practical level, lack of access to technology presents a significant barrier. Millions of seniors in the U.S. alone lack home broadband internet access. And in our increasingly connected world, this limits their ability to access online resources, virtual social platforms, even just basic information.
And this digital divide isn't equal, is it?
No, it disproportionately affects low-income individuals, those with less formal education, certain racial and ethnic groups, and people living in rural areas. It just compounds existing vulnerabilities to isolation.
Okay. So, given the depth and breadth of these challenges,
Yeah.
what are the pathways forward? How do people cope? The good news, I hope, is that there are many different ways people cope with grief and actively work to find connection when feeling lonely.
There absolutely are. And a crucial first step, maybe the hardest one, is just recognizing and accepting that you are experiencing these feelings, and that seeking support is a sign of strength, not weakness.
That's important. And leaning on existing relationships seems fundamental.
Totally fundamental. Family and friends, even if they're grieving too, can be an immense source of comfort and support. Sharing memories of the person who's gone, talking about the impact they had, that can be a powerful way for everyone to process the loss together and keep their memory alive.
And don't hesitate to bring up the person's name.
Please don't.
Yeah.
Often people are afraid to, fearing it'll cause pain, but for many who are grieving, just hearing the person mentioned is actually a cherished connection.
Good point. And for many, professional support is also vital, isn't it? Especially with complicated grief or chronic loneliness.
Absolutely vital. Grief counseling or talk therapy with a trained professional can provide a safe space and, importantly, practical tools. Tools to help process emotions, understand the changes the loss brought, and gradually integrate that loss into your life. Support groups, too, whether specific to a type of loss or more general, they offer this unique kind of solace.
How?
Just connecting with others who truly get what you're going through because they've walked a similar path, that can really reduce the feeling of being alone in your pain. And these groups are available both in person and online now.
That makes sense. And then there are these community-based approaches that seem to be gaining traction.
Yes, like senior centers. They're far more than just places for activities. They're vital community anchors. They facilitate social interaction, provide shared experiences, and combat isolation just by bringing people together. And there's also this really interesting concept called social prescribing.
Social prescribing, what's that?
Yep. It's where healthcare providers, recognizing the health impacts of loneliness, can actually connect patients with non-medical community resources. Things like group exercise classes, gardening clubs, volunteer opportunities, arts programs.
So treating social connection almost like medicine.
Pretty much like a form of preventative medicine or therapy.
Wow. There are also some really inspiring programs focused on bridging generational divides, aren't there?
There are initiatives where students visit older adults, sometimes providing practical help like shopping or lighthouse work, but crucially offering companionship and social interaction.
Like that story of Pat you mentioned.
Exactly, Pat, an older adult in one such program. Pat found immense value not just in the help with chores, but in those predictable, regular visits from students. Just the simple act of knowing someone reliable was coming, having conversations, sharing tea, that consistent companionship made Pat feel less isolated and more secure at home.
And it benefits the students too, presumably.
Hugely. They gain valuable experience, learn from the life wisdom of older adults. Meanwhile, the older adults experience reduced loneliness, enhanced well-being. It just highlights how connection can be found in unexpected places and across age groups.
That's great. And alongside these structured supports, there are simple, personal steps people can take.
Definitely. Prioritizing physical self-care is crucial. Getting enough sleep, eating nourishing food, getting some physical activity, all of that can positively impact your mood and resilience. Re-engaging, even slowly, with hobbies or activities you once enjoyed can provide purpose and, opportunities for connection.
What about faith communities?
For some, connecting with a faith community provides deep spiritual and social support.
Right.
Absolutely. And even the simple, non-judgmental companionship of a pet can significantly alleviate feelings of loneliness for many people.
If you've lost a spouse, the practical stuff can feel overwhelming too, right?
Yeah.
Managing the house, finances.
Alongside the grief, yes. It's often advised, if possible, to maybe postpone major life decisions. Things like selling your home or making big career changes while you're in that acute phase of mourning. Just give yourself time and space to adjust.
That sounds like good advice. And when someone feels ready to tentatively maybe re-engage socially after a loss?
Take it at your own pace. It's okay to start small. Maybe initiating plans yourself with trusted friends or family, or choosing lower stress activities like meeting for a walk or a quiet coffee instead of a big party.
Makes sense.
Exploring group activities or volunteering related to your interests can be a natural way to meet new people who share common ground. And just remember, meaningful relationships aren't limited to one age group. Connections with friends and family of all ages can be incredibly supportive.
A final thought on technology. We mentioned the digital divide, but for those who do have access, how helpful is it really?
It's a mixed bag, it seems. While it offers obvious ways to connect video calls, social media, some research suggests that passive or excessive internet use might actually increase feelings of loneliness for some people.
So mindlessly scrolling versus actively engaging.
Kind of. Using technology for active, meaningful connection, like scheduling a proper video chat or participating in a focused online group that seems more likely to be beneficial. However, the evidence for digital tools alone effectively reducing loneliness in older adults hasn't always been as strong as we might hope, suggesting that combining digital interaction with real-world connection whenever possible is probably key.
Okay, let's try to synthesize this. We've covered a lot in this deep dive. What really stands out?
Well, I think it's clear that loneliness and grief are distinct but often overlapping emotions. They aren't just feelings, they have profound, measurable impacts on our physical health, our mental well-being, and maybe even the cohesion of our communities.
Yeah, and we've learned their causes are varied.
Yeah.
Stemming from significant loss, sure, but also major life transitions, societal factors, and that tricky self-perpetuating cycle loneliness can create.
But critically, we've also seen there isn't just one single answer or pathway through these experiences. There are many different avenues for support, ranging from the fundamental strength of existing relationships
Friends and family?
to the crucial role of professional help and support groups, to the really powerful benefits of intergenerational connections and intentional community resources,
Huh.
like that social prescribing idea.
Right. It's clear that navigating these feelings is a process, often a long one, right? No quick fixes.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
But understanding their nature and impact and proactively seeking connection and support, that seems to be the most critical piece of the puzzle.
This raises such an important question, doesn't it? If chronic loneliness can have health consequences comparable to smoking, what does that tell us fundamentally about the vital, absolute necessity of human connection in our lives? And maybe, how can we, both individually and collectively, prioritize building and nurturing the kinds of relationships and community bonds that can truly buffer against isolation and provide a strong foundation of support, especially for those navigating the deep waters of grief?
That is something profound to consider.
Something to mull over until our next deep dive.